let's get stuck into talking about Tiger King before we get on to anything else, because you've just watched that latest episode, so that's still fresh in your mind. But what were your thoughts on Tiger King?
Tiger King was absolutely crazy. It was wonderfully crazy. It was my thoughts on Tiger King, and I think that that was kind of everybody's thoughts on Tiger King, was that it was wonderfully crazy. Um, and it was very refreshing to see so many wonderfully crazy and wonderfully complex people in a real life setting. Was my overwhelming thoughts on Tiger King. What about yourself?
I loved it. I just, again, as you say, people being wonderfully crazy. It was nice to watch something that wasn't so polished. And yes, obviously, there's an element of people aren't themselves, people aren't 100% real, but it was as real as I think you could get for a setting like that. And it was something that I loved it, and I don't understand myself for loving it so much either, because he was clearly that crap crazy.
Joe Exotic was obviously sort of staged as the protagonist, and in much the same way as Walter White was the protagonist in Breaking Bad, Joe Exotic was the protagonist of this, and his Joe, you couldn't help but love him, even though he was awful on every level, and I had a lot of sympathy. You know what I mean? I found myself rooting for him, even though he was doing terrible things, and everybody kind of hated him.
Yeah, I agree. It was a weird thing actually really liking him as a person. Like, in reality, he's not a good person to like. Like, some of the things that we didn't know about him during the show that I find fascinating watching that last episode there last night. He was terrified of tigers. That
Yes.
is unbelievable. He was terrified of them. But whenever I found out that he was putting the tigers down that didn't need to, and the one that he shot in the head because it tried to bite him, this was a guy who claimed to be the Tiger King and loved these animals and looked after them, and in reality, he was just really cruel. But the way it was shown, and Netflix have a wonderful way of doing that. They have a wonderful way of showing us what they want to see. It was the same as a show, I don't know if you ever saw it, it was called The Staircase, where you really rooted for the guy in it, but he was up for murdering his wife, and he probably did it. But the way they portrayed it, they show you what they want to see. So the reality of who these people are isn't what we see. So we saw this guy who loved tigers and was so hard done by with Carol Baskin coming in at every angle to try and stop him doing what he loved, when in reality he was just a cruel person that didn't really like him. He was just in it for the fame and money.
The interesting point that you brought up there a couple of times with the Tiger King, and it's absolutely true, is that the Tiger King documentary has presented. A lot of people have said that they aren't happy with how they've been presented, and it's the extent to which how much are we is everything present us in a certain respect. It narrows us down to to our simplest common denominators, or the common denominators that fit the narrative. It was a well told narrative, but it was also possibly and probably a false narrative. But false narratives aren't necessarily bad, and I'm kind of making a semi political point here. Just because something's fake news doesn't necessarily mean it's bad news. Um, there's a whole lot of truths from certain perspectives that are interesting to listen to and interesting to watch, and that some people's truths contradicted other people's truths was a fascinating thing about it. What is that something that you thought at all, or um,
I love how you articulate things so much better than me, but when I'm listening to you, I'm like, yes, that's it. That's the words I want to use.
yes. See, Carol Baskin's truth is that she is the protagonist. Joe Exotic's truth is that he is the protagonist. What I call Lowe is his truth is that he is the protagonist, and they all believe themselves to be the protagonist, and they all kind of are. And the wonderful complexity to human nature is that we are all the protagonist, except that we still find ourselves rubbing people the wrong way from time to time, um, and yes, and the overall arcing narrative of this documentary is that Joe Exotic is kind of the protagonist, even though he's terrible. But I think that more than showing us about animal cruelty, this shows us, because this documentary has very little to do with animals, this documentary has to do with the complex nature of humanity, and tigers are the backdrop, you know, and that was what I particularly enjoyed about watching this documentary. And it's not about tigers at all. It's about the flawed nature of human nature.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that each and every person that was in this show was messed up in their own way. I mean, some of the, like his first husband with the no teeth and always having the shirt off. It's interesting, I've seen two interviews with him. One where he said that it was Joe and the producers who told him to take his shirt off. But last night, talking to Joe, or I say last night, in that last episode when he was talking to Joe McHale, he actually said that, well, if you had a body like mine with all those tattoos, you would take your shirt off too. And I find that interesting that he's contradicted himself in different videos. But it's very interesting whenever you look at the people that he went with. His husbands, who weren't actually legal, his husbands, shockingly enough. I don't think it's legal in any state for you to marry two people at once.
I don't actually know, but I'm not an authority.
But he seemed to pick people who were a wee bit vulnerable, and he could kind of, they were attractive in their own way. Obviously, John having no teeth wouldn't have done it for me, but in every other sense, he actually is quite an attractive guy. And you could see where, with Joe wanting his fame and everything, that's why he was drawn to these people. And also for the sake of the show, you could see how he knew that these people were going to be good viewing.
I think that this is the number one thing about Joe Exotic being the protagonist of this narrative, is that Joe Exotic does have a certain charm. He may or may not have a certain attractiveness. You would be more the authority on that than I would be. But he definitely has a certain charisma, a certain je ne sais quoi that you can't turn away from. You know, as soon as he is in your documentary, you've got a fantastic leading man that you just can't help but be endeared towards, no matter what he does. And it's, you know, he can do no wrong somehow, even though he does plenty of wrong. His charm, obviously these vulnerable people are endeared to his charm, and I'm kind of endeared to his charm too. I can't help but envy him in some way, or admire him in some way. What are your thoughts?
Being in prison.
After watching last night's episode, it would not surprise me at all if he did that. I mean, I know that for me, I think he probably did do that. What do you think?
I think he deserves for everything he's done. I mean, let's face it, all of them have said, he offered me money, he told me to do it, he begged me to do it. You know, I think the writing is on the wall there. He did. I actually saw something popped up there a wee while ago on my YouTube recommendations, a couple of videos saying Trump vows to look into Joe Exotic.
Yes, I actually watched the interview on that in the Telegraph. He was asked by a journalist if he'd heard about it, and Trump is the president of the United States. He hasn't watched it and he knows nothing about it, so he was asking the journalist about it, like, what is this? I mean, Donald Trump is presently overseeing the biggest crisis America's ever faced, so he didn't know anything about the Tiger King, and I would be more worried if he did know something about the Tiger King, personally, because I want the president of the United States to be worrying about the COVID-19 virus. I mean, call me old-fashioned, you know, I would be worried if the president had an opinion on this, but he did say he was going to look into it, which I imagine just means asking somebody before not taking... Presidential pardons are rare in American politics. So it's unlikely that he's going to get any sort of presidential pardon. I don't know the exact statistics, but I'm pretty sure it's less than 100 a year or something. And that's for people that are definitely innocent, usually of drug offences. It's a real sort of hot button type topic in American politics. So it's, you know, I wouldn't be holding out hope that he's going to pardon Joe Exotic.
My thing about it was I just laughed thinking this is his daily chat with the journalists, talking about what he's doing with COVID-19, what's happening next, what's going on with their lockdowns and all of that. And somebody asks him about the fact that his son had posted about trying to help Joe Exotic, and they're saying, are you going to, and you're like, as you said, this is the President of the United States. There is no way that he is going to sit down and put any time and effort into this, because if he did, we don't want him in there.
Exactly.
You know, at the end of the day, as you said, again, it's the biggest crisis this world has seen for centuries. We don't want him sitting down watching Tiger King. He can do that once we're all away from all of this. He can watch it all back. It's on Netflix.
Yes.
But I'm happy that Donald Trump does not know who the Tiger King is, although maybe he could do his hair like his. Should show him that, just shake his hairdo up a bit.
Yes, yes. I think that would be very popular if he did do that. Now, I think that would be a funny meme if Donald Trump was to get involved and kind of do his hair like Joe Exotic. I think that would win him some fans in Oklahoma. Not that he particularly needs fans in Oklahoma now, let's be honest, but I don't think Oklahoma's going to go for the Democrats, you know, it's, but...
No, so that was a good one, but let's talk about Carol Baskin. Everybody's talking about how she killed her husband and fed him to the tigers. I find this one amazing because part of me wants it to be true.
I want it to be true!
Yeah, but I actually don't believe it is. I mean, again, with the whole, Netflix shows us what they want us to see, so they want us to believe that there is a chance that he did this or that she did this, and her husband can't just drop off the face of the earth, because that doesn't happen. But it does. In reality, it happens all the time.
Okay.
You know, so maybe he did just disappear. I mean, if I was married to Carol Baskin, I would want to drop off the face of the earth as well. You know, we don't know his background. We don't know what else was going on to make him disappear. But I don't think that she killed him, as much as it would make it even better if she had.
Are you team Joe Exotic here? Are you kind of on the team hating Carol Baskin bandwagon, or are you sort of... I see kind of they're as bad as each other, pretty much. It's...
I'm on the fence.
Yes. But Carol Baskin, it's sort of like... I find that I am more drawn to hate or something, because I don't know, like, Joe's got the charm, whereas Carol Baskin it's basically the fundamental... God, there's no real way to talk about this show without getting kind of political, but it's basically the fundamental difference between the left and right in American politics right now. You know, she thinks she's doing the best, and he thinks he's doing the best, and so he's kind of like the right, and she's kind of like the left, and they're both the protagonists. They both absolutely think they're doing the right thing, but they're as bad as each other. And it's interesting that in their own narratives they are the protagonist, and for a lot of people it's kind of easier to hate Carol Baskin because she doesn't have the charm than it is to hate Joe Exotic because he has the charm, you know, or at least that was how it was filmed.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think the fact that we know what Joe's doing, we know that right from the start. You know, he has tigers in captivity, he's showing them off and letting people come and see them, whereas Carol comes along and is all, no, I'm here to stop all of this, and in reality she has a zoo herself. You know, it's not a sanctuary, it's not there to save the animals. She's doing the exact same thing, but she tried to portray herself as this great person trying to stop all of this. And I think that's why more people hate her than him, because she pretended to be good when really she wasn't.
It kind of it seems to me like the underlying theme of the Tiger King was to like pastiche contemporary American society and the difference between the left and the right. Maybe to parody Trump versus Hillary, or maybe to parody just the left versus the right generally. The kind of social... God, how have I managed to talk about politics? But this was my kind of impression of the show whenever I was watching it, was that it isn't about almost like the really important issues get drawn to the background because we're engaged in political theatre. And so the important issue here was the tigers. Am I overthinking about this? Um,
No, I agree. I do agree with you.
yes, but in like so the theatre is that Carol on the left is sort of virtue signaling her higher virtue. Joe on the right is kind of a bit more upfront about not being as virtuous and kind of more plain spoken. And in all of this theatre, the important issues like global warming, whatever other important global issues are happening right now, are kind of being drawn to the background when they're engaged in a feud, which kind of doesn't really matter and which kind of screws all of us. And that's kind of been why I have really enjoyed watching The Tiger King, because it was a complete kind of, it put our contemporary world into kind of an easy to process thing for people on both sides of the political spectrum, to kind of see that, you know, that they are as bad as the other side. And I think that some people who are on either side find it difficult to see the bad points of their side. But there you got to see the bad points of both sides, and maybe root for one or the other. And most people are rooting for Joe, in the same way as a lot of people are rooting for Trump. You know, and it's sort of, it kind of, it shows that to people who maybe don't understand it. But a whole lot of people don't realise that it's showing them that in a way in which they maybe don't understand it.
Yeah. It's interesting that you compared Joe to Trump, because just whenever I talk about Carol and Joe, makes me think of back whenever Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were running for president, and you were screwed if you went with this one, you were screwed if you went with this one. That's Carol and Joe.
Exactly.
You know,
And
neither are perfect.
neither are good. Neither are kind of even kind of. Neither are looking after the animals, basically. You know, and that's kind of, or both think they're looking after the animals, and both probably do enough for the animals to get by. But you kind of wouldn't want either. It's kind of the thing, and it was wonderful, and that it was a documentary, and that it was real life, and that a lot of these outlandish things happened, which we're going to need to come on to now, because a lot of outlandish things happened.
Yes.
First outlandish thing was what? Well, the marriage. Let's talk about marriage first of all.
Yeah.
I couldn't care less that he was gay.
No.
So I don't know, and I don't care less that he's in a trifecta marriage, or I don't know what the correct terminology of that is. But I suppose it was an interesting character trait. Yeah. And the movie didn't present it as if anybody really cared, because nobody does really care.
No, and I think that's good to see as well. I think that was something that struck me, that it was just there. It wasn't a big story that he was this gay person, that he had two husbands, and you know, it just was. And I think that is amazing that we live in a time now where people are just more going, all right, he's got husbands, I've got a wife, he's got husbands. You know, this is just life. But I don't know, there was something about his husbands that I just found so vulnerable, and probably the fact that they were hooked on meth, you know, didn't really help. But part of me felt sad for them, because you knew that they weren't 100% happy the whole time. And I haven't listened to their interviews after. Well, sorry, obviously we can't listen to Travis, but listening to John afterwards, you seen how he really wasn't happy, and it is one of those things, you kind of get stuck in a place where you're getting something for it, but you're not actually happy in it, you know.
I think that we've all been there. I think that this is kind of a wonderful little subplot. Yes, they were young, yes, they were vulnerable, but we've all been there at a place in our lives where we kind of thought at the time that we were happy doing what we were doing and whatever, and we could all empathise with, especially, you know, Travis, who was very, very pretty to be married to Joe Exotic, you know, like he's up, you know. I mean, John to a lesser extent, yes, young and, you know, whatever, but, you know, I couldn't help but notice that Travis was very beautiful for a man, like. So Yes. So, do we move on to Travis then? Is that where the natural conversation
Yeah,
topic
well,
is taking us?
let's sidestep over into the whole Travis thing. Like, I still find that so shocking.
Mm.
You know, how he was just standing having a conversation with, I can't think of his name.
I can't think of his name now either. The
He's
campaign
just the
manager.
guy from the campaign.
Aye.
Let's just say that, the campaign guy.
Yes.
I was just having a conversation saying to him, oh yeah, it won't fire because it didn't have what? There was something not there. And the next thing he's dead.
Yes. Did you hear the campaign guy saying on the most recent episode, like that he kind of looked confused and shocked for 5 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, how do you come back from seeing that?
Yeah.
Because it must have felt like a lifetime to him watching him see that once he realised that he was going to kill himself, that was actually happening. For campaign guy to be sitting watching that must have felt like so long. Not just a couple of split seconds before he was dead, but that must have felt like a lifetime. And I'm sure every single day in his life he plays that over and over. I don't think that part should have been aired. I know we didn't see him, but I think they should have taken that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Um. Obviously, that absolutely devastated kind of everybody in the whole entire thing, and it was absolutely shocking. Like, I couldn't believe that a documentary had that in it. As you were saying, but I think it was a better documentary for having it in it.
I just don't like that they capitalised on that. But then, I mean, during the funeral, jokes aside, you know, so of course he was going to put it in, you know, because he couldn't just stick with having a funeral for him. He had to show what actually happened, show somebody's trauma. You know, yes, we didn't get to see him actually die, but we saw someone see it happen. You know, you can imagine how many times he has replayed that clip over and over and over again.
Yes. And then we move on. What do you call the transgender woman? Zay or Zappa or something?
I didn't know that she was transgender until I watched that episode.
Yes. I thought she was just a lesbian when watching the show. But yes, so she or he, we're gonna need to be. We'll say he. He like obviously got his arm bitten off. He was absolutely committed to the Tigers and stuff. And yes, I was reminded of his story just there now from watching the most recent episode, which I'm just after watching. But yes, he is absolutely committed to the Tigers and stuff. And yeah, there was a tragedy that he lost so much, and quite a lot of people lost so much. Yes.
Amazing how even after losing an arm, he was still right back in there. While he was still healing, he was still in there working with those tigers. Yes, I do believe that. I think he said that he didn't work with that same tiger again, which is fair enough. But he still just kept working with tigers. I don't know that I could. I don't care how much I like them, but you know, the tiger took any of my limbs away. I don't think I'd want to work with them anymore. I'd be afraid of losing another one.
Yes. And he's doing that for, like, most of those guys, most of the people that were working there were working on it for £100 a week, and he, like, is losing limbs and getting the accident played for every new member of staff. And for £100 a week, you know, you have to really like tigers.
I would want £100 per training seminar that was shown in. Never mind £100 a week for working there.
Yes, I can't agree more. What do you think of your man Lowe? You know, the businessman who kind of became his partner?
Jeff and his wife were a bizarre one. You know, he came in all guns blazing, and of course Joe was all like, he's stealing my zoo, and actually probably did them a favour. I mean, let's face it, he was the one that had money, he was the one that came along and helped them, and he's the reason that the zoo is actually still there. You know, if it wasn't for him, those tigers would all be dead by now.
Yeah. Again, it was sort of like the movie or the documentary. It cast it from Joe Exotic's point of view. Joe Exotic was obviously the protagonist, and as such a dynamic character, how can he not be? But yeah, Jeff Lowe, especially in last night's episode or whenever it was that it was aired, came across completely differently than he did in the documentary. Like we saw him argue with Joe, we saw him lose his temper, we saw a lot of people say bad things about him, and probably in real life that's not the true narrative. And that's one of the fascinating things, and I can't help but just keep bringing this back to politics because somehow just definitely there's a political undertone here. You know, there's a lot of maybe not fake news, but news from a certain perspective that's going around today, and it's hard to know what the correct perspective is nowadays in contemporary political landscape. And this is what I thought whenever I was watching it. This is the perfect analogy to explain fake news to people is that the truth you're being told is probably not the truth. It's a truth from a certain perspective.
I would agree. It's like reading things from different newspapers. You could be reading about the same thing, but reading it in very different views. You know, we're told what they want us to hear, and when it comes to Netflix, with any documentary, they have a beautiful way of filming and putting it all together and showing us exactly what they want us to see. And as you're saying, we saw all the bad bits of Jeff, when the reality is, yeah, he likes to have extramarital sex along with his wife, and you know, he likes to do whatever he does, you know. But he actually probably isn't that bad of a guy. You know, we just saw him going crazy because that's what Joe and the producers of this show wanted us to see, because they wanted us to root for Joe. They wanted us to root for him. And Jeff is this big bad wolf coming along to blow down his house.
Yes, I mean basically, it's kind of none of my business or none of your business what they do as a loving couple anyway. As a loving couple, you know, if that works for them, then that works for them. If they're not engaged in criminal activity, then fair enough. Although the documentary did heavily insinuate that they were engaged in other criminal activity, that their extramarital stuff is not the criminal activity, so it's not for me to judge, and I don't really care. Um, you know, and I think most people don't really care. Although I think that that was kind of included in the documentary to kind of in, incite people who might care, or incite
Yeah.
people to kind of see him more as an antagonist because of those things. Whereas in reality, it doesn't matter. You know, eh, again, I can't help but bring this back to politics and sort of be like, they keep telling us about the kind of sexual infidelities of our politicians, and most of us just don't care. You know,
Yep.
that's not what we're judging our politicians on, is their extra. And some people want to get all high and mighty and cast that person as an antagonist for their lawful extramarital affairs. Um, I couldn't care less. You know, at the end of the day, it's about the Tigers. You know, and is he going to look after the Tigers? And that's what I care about. And that was sort of the political theatre that we are so often engaged in seems to think that we care, or seems to incite people to care, but I don't.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Just seeing a comment there from our lovely Lynn there, she's saying that she can't believe that Joe didn't provide counselling for his campaign manager. That was something that I did actually want to say. I think that was crazy. He should have actually provided counselling for more than just him, especially the guy who got his arm taken off. There should have been counselling there as well. But the fact that he didn't get counselling himself. He he see, what was it, a shaman? He did
Yes.
somebody, but he didn't get counselling. He didn't seek professional help for any of them, and I definitely think that the campaign manager still needs counselling, and will do continually for quite a long time for that. But yeah, I agree with Lynn that he should have provided counselling.
Is this a good segue to bring us into kind of what we plan to talk about, i.e., mental health, and to kind of put a,
Yeah,
you know, uh, with for the rest of the blogs? I think that we have talked about most of what we want to talk about with the Tiger King.
yeah, yeah. I think, we've done what, nearly half an hour. They're talking about Tiger King. That was longer than I expected. But yeah, obviously, I've said that I obviously want to talk more about mental and physical health on my podcast and on my videos and stuff. So I wanted to take this opportunity to get a wee bit more insight into you and what you've gone through. Obviously, I know that you have bipolar, and you living with this have learned what helps you, what doesn't work for you. But I'd love for you to go in depth more, especially having read your blogs. One of them, you wrote on mindfulness. You know, that's something that I think that you could tell us more about tonight.
Okay. Well, firstly, I really want to say that I am not an expert in mindfulness at all, nor do I necessarily think that particularly anybody is. But for me, mindfulness has been something that I have kind of done and not done for a while, and something that I'm not good enough at doing, and that I intend to do more. Meditative practice is something that they recommend for people that have extremely high moods, and I suppose for people that have extremely low moods as well. So on both ends of the spectrum, mindfulness and more presentness can be beneficial, and just for pretty much everybody, you know, to take that moment, take a few moments every day, and just to practice a breathing exercise and practice focusing on only one thing. Um, and the idea is that you kind of practice the muscle of focusing on one thing, so that you find it better or easier to focus on one thing moving forward in your life, and that you find it easier to ground yourself if you find yourself in a stressful situation. Um, so, mindfulness was first recommended to me in a course that they sent me on, for people who are, what's the right word, living with bipolar. It was something that they do recommend for, especially people who are susceptible to high moods. And my mindfulness practice has not been perfect over the years, and you know, it's really only something I've just started doing. Um, Although I did attend a course on mindfulness in Belfast. There's many courses on mindfulness in Belfast, but I attended a course in Queen's. It was a 12-week course in Queen's on mindfulness, which I would highly recommend, although it's very busy. So it runs from the semester times, so September through to January, or January through to May. And there might be one over the summer, I'm not sure. So there is one there, it's about £80, I think, and you go on a Tuesday or Thursday or something. And the reason why I would recommend doing mindfulness with other people is that there's kind of a cumulative effect. So if you can get together with some of your friends and all practice it together, they kind of combined, for want of a better word, aura or atmosphere, kind of really kind of puts you into that kind of transcendental place. And it's easier to focus on one thing for an extended period of time if other people are doing it as well.
Yeah.
So, yes, mindfulness courses for any sort of mental health problem, or really just any sort of general practice, is something that they would strongly recommend for pretty much everybody. Mindfulness is different, or it's both different and the same to other forms of meditation. So, in mindfulness, you kind of actively do nothing, essentially, or actively do only one thing, or whatever. Whereas in other forms of meditation, you may actively do something, like actively chant, or actively do a stretch, like in yoga or Pilates, or actively do something else. There's many, many different forms of mindfulness or of meditation, and all of these forms of meditative practice are beneficial for mental health. And yeah.
Okay, well, I actually watched a video this morning. It came up on my recommendations, funnily enough, after us talking about mindfulness, but it was talking you through things that you could do throughout the day, and it started off when you wake up, before you even open your eyes, focus on three sounds that you can hear. So it said maybe the birds singing, maybe a car going by, the rumble of your boiler. Then it was focus on 3 things that you can touch. And then it did the same throughout the day. And then at the end of the day, it told you to focus on different parts of your body. And I've actually done something with that before whenever I was getting things for sleep, where you focus on everything from starting from your feet, focus on them, then your legs, then your knees, and then moving up. And I think it's interesting, the more you watch and the more you read on things like this, how much you can actually learn to help yourself, as you're saying, continually. There's so much that we can find on the internet on these things, as well as going, I will look into that mindfulness course in Queen's, because I think that could be something that's really valuable for anybody.
You might find there's one nearby you that's cheaper or free, or that's run by the government, or I'm sure there's plenty. I know that I went to a course in Queen's, but that doesn't mean that that's the only place to go, nor does it mean it's the cheapest place to go. So it's definitely worth Googling, and if that is something that you're doing, I'll maybe go with you. But yeah, it's absolutely something that is good for mind, body, and soul in order to practice the skill of being more in this moment right now, as opposed to being what they call the monkey brain. And we all have the monkey brain, the ruminations, where we all kind of beat ourselves up over things that have happened in the past, or have stress or anxiety over things that are happening in the future. And so so if you imagine you go to the gym and you do squats or whatever, you get stronger. This is basically no different. You are essentially working out your mind and focusing for. It's like what I was saying in the last stream about the power of habit. You just try whenever you first get started to focus for 5 seconds, then try 10 seconds, then try 15 seconds. And, the idea of mindfulness is to learn to forgive yourself for your faults. And this is something I'm very bad at. And this is something that a lot of people with mental health problems are very bad at. They beat themselves up, basically, for the things that they've done wrong in the past, and they don't move on. They don't come into the present. They don't appreciate the present enough. And this is a practice that is worth introducing into your lifestyle. Even if you could take 2 minutes every day just to take a look at something that, take a look at, this and just look at it for a minute and say, what is this? And try and see it in the moment for what it is for 5 or 10 seconds, and try and see it in a different light or something. Then that would be a mindfulness practice.
No, I like that. Just actually was reminded there after our talk of courses and stuff, you were doing an online webinar on Monday, was it?
Oh, a mindfulness? Yes, I was, and I intended to, I actually signed into that twice. It was Eastern Standard Time, so I signed in at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time or Greenwich Summer Time, or the clocks had just changed. And then I signed in at 9 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time or Greenwich Summer Time or whatever we're on now. So that wasn't it either. So I think it was 10 o'clock, but at that stage I was just done. I really did intend to, but by that stage it was 10 o'clock at night and I just signed in twice. So I don't know how to get back in touch with that. So that is an opportunity that has unfortunately passed me by. But that being said, it was something I fully intended to do, and it's maybe something I'll look into in the future for the two of us, because I'm sure there's going to be something else like that we can sign into on Zoom during these times.
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, the whole Eastern Standard Time and Pacific Standard Time, I have had to, every time, I don't know if you've seen my post that I put in the chronic pain group today, I actually added in 8:30 our time, I think is 1:30 Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah. So there's a 7-hour difference then?
I think that's because we have, I don't think they have daylight saving.
All right.
That might be what it is. So not only, I think it's normally 6 hours, because I know Florida is normally 5 hours ahead,
Okay.
but with daylight saving, they're 5 hours behind. So they're then 6 hours behind us. but I'm nearly 100% sure that one of them was 1:30 and the other one was like 2:30 or something like that. But I always have to go in and check before I put out a time, because there is people in America, and I have to show both sides of the rough time zones. That's the worst thing about America. The time zones, they're so hard to get used to. So I have to always Google it, so you can be caught out so easily.
I was caught out. I was completely caught out. So I signed in at 6 o'clock our time, whatever time that is nowadays. Is it British summertime? So it's not Greenwich Mean Time. And then, so I signed in at 10 o'clock, which I thought was 6 o'clock New York Standard Time. But the seminar didn't start. So I was going to sign in at 11, but then I want to go to bed and I want to watch TV. So I did fully intend to attend that mindfulness thing on Zoom, and I might look into it again. But yes, unfortunately, that passed me by. So I'm going to take 1 second here and get a glass of water.
No, that's okay. You go ahead. I was prepared. What are you guilty of, then?
Yes, so have we sufficiently discussed that topic, or is there anything else that you want to move on to?
Move on from that one.
Okay.
Moving on to, I wanted you to tell me more about fasting and what it does for you and why you recommend it.
Okay. What it does for me, let's see. I started fasting kind of by accident. I just found one morning that I woke up and I wasn't really hungry. So I decided just to wait until like 11 o'clock and then, to have breakfast. So that was fine. I had breakfast at about 11 o'clock. It was fine. Didn't really think about it. The next morning, I wanted to go out for a cycle in the morning, and I wasn't hungry before I left for my cycle. So I kind of went out for my cycle, and I went out for my cycle the day before, and I kind of found myself very sluggish, very kind of, I have 3 or 4 pounds to lose. But the next day that I went out for my cycle, and I hadn't eaten breakfast, I actually found counterintuitively that I had a lot of energy whenever I was cycling. So there's a lot of science behind why I found that. But anyway, because I noticed that anecdotally, that I had more energy if I skipped breakfast and not less, it meant that I sort of started skipping breakfast more. So obviously I was kind of curious about why would I feel in myself as if I have more energy on the bike and not less if I skip breakfast? So obviously I kind of looked into that, and I kind of I started going onto the web and kind of finding out a bit more, and so that's what I found for me, is that for me I had more energy if I skipped breakfast. So gradually what I did then was that I skipped breakfast up until about 1 or up until about 2. And then at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon I was just like, well, why skip breakfast now? Why not keep going? So obviously I found out about fasting, and I found out about how your body kind of starts to break down your fat as opposed to breaking down your muscle if you're in a fasted state. So that's the reason why you have so much energy on the bike, is because you're essentially breaking down your fat. So what your body does first, basically, is that your body breaks down the energy that it has available. So this is the science behind it. Not this was unbeknownst to me whenever I first did this, but this is the science behind it. If you eat something, your body will use that first, because your body wants to save the fat, because that's your kind of rainy day fund. That's your savings account, if you think about it like that. So obviously your body wants to spend the money in your current account first. So that's the food that you have in your bowels. So it doesn't want to go into your savings if it doesn't have to. But if what you want to do is burn fat, then what you want to do is make sure that there's nothing in there, so that you essentially have to burn the fat. So that was my sort of anecdotal thing. then I kind of fell down that rabbit hole, and I found out about all the other benefits to fasting. Um, Dr. Rhonda Patrick is just a podcast that I listen to. She is very I wouldn't say inaccessible, but academic in her podcast called Find My Fitness. So she goes into it in detail about all the anti-aging effects that fasting can have. So all the effects on kind of the skin, all the effects on kind of the effects on kind of making you live longer. They've carried out experiments in rats where they kind of they fasted a rat for what was it, something like 16 hours or something, which is like 3 days for a rat. And they found that the rats that they fasted for 16 hours lived for like 2 weeks longer than the rats that they didn't fast for that period. They also found that the rats that they fasted had more muscle mass and less fat, and also had more healthy, like a more healthy heart, and more healthy. So so then fasting just kind of became something that I don't do every day. I don't believe in going all out on anything, but it is something that I would recommend that people implement into their lifestyles at least one day a week. And if you find yourself doing it every other day, or 4 days a week, then absolutely do that if that's comfortable for you. Part of the mindfulness thing is that you have to kind of forgive yourself if you fail, or not set sort of high expectations for yourself, or you know not ruminate on your failures. Weight loss is a kind of a process that you kind of just have to you know endeavor on, and accept that on some days you're going to fail, and on other days you're going to succeed, and hopefully in the long term you succeed. But there may be times in the short term when you don't, or when you just fancy a pizza, and that's okay. The great thing about fasting, especially if you do OMAD, 1 meal a day, is that if you decide that you want a pizza, you may or may not be below your calorie budget for that day. Even if you have a pizza, or you have an Indian, or you have a Chinese, or you have a... So, as much as I wouldn't necessarily recommend pizzas every night, there is an extent to which, if you're working out and you're active, you can have a pizza every night and still kind of lose weight. So that's always nice too.
Okay, Lynn is there asking, is that ketosis you're talking about?
Ketosis, yeah.
Yeah, that's what that is, okay.
In case you're wondering, Lynn, I don't have the comments because we're trying to...
No, I will read them out, sure, because I've got them right in front of me. So at least if one of us are sort of keeping an eye on the questions coming through, then it means we're not both focusing on it, and it's just in the corner of my eye if something pops up every so often.
No problem. Yes, it is ketosis, Lynn. There's a fantastic YouTube channel which I would recommend for everybody called What I've Learned. And for the longest period of time, I'm just quoting this channel. This isn't sort of something I've researched. It's what he's researched, and I'm repeating it. So just, yes. For a long time, they thought that ketosis was a bad thing. Traditional sort of medicine kind of thought that ketosis was a really bad thing. And the reason why is because they found that working class people in the 1900s had very high ketosis rates. So in the 1900s, it used to be the cadavers. Cadavers were very valuable. So a lot of the cadavers that were sent to medicine were of working class people, because middle and upper class people could afford to buy their own cadavers to have them buried, and make sure that their cadavers weren't stolen. But all the working class people had a lot of ketones, so they thought that ketones and malnutrition were related, whereas in fact it wasn't that. It was that kind of yes, that they had higher rates of ketones, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Whereas so that was kind of the argument of the ketosis diet, is sort of and he presents it in a very good way, and in a much more articulate way than I can. I'm not remembering all the details there, but that's why it took a long time for contemporary medicine to kind of realise that ketones are actually kind of a good thing, especially for mental function, and kind of being at your best mentally, and anecdotally possibly good for depression, which is kind of our main kind of theme of the evening. Um, yes, why is it good for depression? Many reasons, which are kind of complicated to explain. Um, I want to start out by saying that I now don't drink as much coffee as I have done in the past. The reason why is because when I was fasting, when you fast, your your insulin, you're a lot more insulin sensitive than you would be if you don't fast. That means that what you eat, you're a lot more sensitive to. So if you if you drink caffeine, for example, you're a bit more sensitive to it, and that means that you'll have a bit more anxiety, a bit more depression. Caffeine probably causes anxiety and depression in everybody, but if you fast, you're more sensitive to that. So I now drink tea because it has a lower caffeine content, and that has been one of the many things I've done to kind of self improve recently, especially with fasting. But that has been just a mistake that I've made in the past. That I was drinking sort of 4 or 5 cups of coffee a day, and I was very anxious, very ruminating, very palpitating, having a lot of sort of panic attacks, and it was just something that I noticed was when I'm fasting, I'm having a lot of panic attacks and I'm ruminating a lot, and so some of these things you just have to live and learn on. That being said, intermittent fasting is good for depression anecdotally, and a lot of people say that it is good for depression as long as you stay away from a lot of caffeine, because it might be your instinct to drink a lot of caffeine. Drink a sufficient amount of water. The reason why is because essentially with all this stuff that's going on in your bowels, that's kind of all inflaming. That's kind of it's all. It kind of don't give the body a chance to get rid of it. It kind of it inflames and inflames and inflames, and those small inflammations cause biochemical imbalances all over the place. So allowing your digestive system to kind of the chance to process and the chance to kind of move things through kind of helps with the inflammation process. Rhonda Patrick talks a lot about how inflammation and depression are basically the same thing. So if you can anti-inflame, you can kind of help with depression.
Just listening to you talking about fasting and stuff and the benefits it does even have on the stomach. I would get chronic ulcers and have had IBS for 11 years now. So it is something I did try and do intermittent fasting, but I have to be honest, after a week of a migraine that did not leave, I had to stop because trying to work with said migraine was not easy. However, now that I am not working and not using up the same amount of energy, that's actually something that I could do. And
Rhonda Patrick does. Rhonda Patrick does. I think is it 13-11. She does. So 13 hours fasting, 11 hours eating. I think she does every day, and that's what she recommends for most women. So 13-11 isn't all that difficult. So essentially, you choose an 11-hour window where you drink coffee and you drink everything within that window, and you eat within that 11-hour window. But all the rest of the time, you don't consume anything. Well, except for water. Within the 13-hour window. So maybe that you have to find anecdotally what works for yourself, and I really want to kind of put it out there that I'm not an expert or a scientist or in anything, and if people are out there, check with your doctor. Don't be trusting me on this stuff. I'm just somebody who is interested. So yes, what do you think caused the migraines?
I think it was just my body adjusting to the different levels of things, especially coming away from having so much caffeine as well. It was just my body getting used to that, but because I was working, I couldn't keep pushing through with it. So, what I was going to say there was that I have just this moment when we started talking about it, noticed I'm not having breakfast at the moment. I'm having my lunch at around 2 o'clock, and then I'm having dinner, and then I'm not actually eating after, say, 9 o'clock anyway. So,
What?
without realising,
7, yeah,
I
7.
am actually, doing that anyway without actually realising. So,
And how's your
it's it's something that I will focus on for a few days and actually see it through properly and see if it's something that continues to have benefits both mentally and physically for my stomach and stuff as well. But listening to you, and I will go and look at those websites as well because it is fascinating. I see Lynn is saying there that it's good for diabetics. Well, listening to you saying about it with the insulin and stuff, I think everything in moderation, and if you know your body and know what you can do, if you have to be careful with things as well, if it does mess with your insulin levels, I think with any diet you have to be careful no matter what, but with diabetes it is something, but it's always good to know that it could be good for diabetics.
Yeah. Something that I've found, or at least something that Thomas Lowe recommends for me, I'm a bit of a chocoholic. So for me, like I always get sugar cravings or spicy food cravings when I'm fasting. And he said to put some pink Himalayan salt into water when you're fasting, because that has like really good electrolytes in it and stuff that you actually need when you're fasting, and that won't break your fast. So just a wee dash of pink Himalayan salt, because pink Himalayan salt is actually a laxative in large doses, but in small doses it's fine. Yes, so that was something that anecdotally he said to kind of do when you're fasting, if you have sugar cravings or if you have. As I say, I am not a doctor. Yes, I've said that. So, but yes, that was something that he recommended, and that's something that I do to try and cut down on sugar cravings. Because another guy that I love, Dr. Eric Berg, I'll probably quote him all the time because I watch all of his videos. He says that what you're craving is what you're burning. So essentially, if you're craving sugar, that means you're burning sugar. If you're craving fat, that means you're essentially burning the fat. So if you're craving, a really, really fatty, meaty mean, a really, really fatty mean, that's probably good because it means you're burning off the fat off your system. What they recommend is a ketosis diet anyway, which is sort of high fat, high protein, low carb. Again, I'm not religious about it, but that is what they recommend. And the more that you go towards sort of higher protein, higher fat, the easier you might find even an Atkins sort of diet or edge your way towards it. I'm not completely dogmatic about any diet. I find that all diets are a wee bit restrictive, but with time restricted eating, I find that I can forgive myself easier if I want a chocolate bar, or I can forgive myself a bit easier if I want a pizza, or I can forgive myself if I, and I think that was one of the things I wrote in the blog, was that anxiety, depression, and looking after your physical health are kind of like a holy trifecta of kind of weight loss, essentially, and mental health. That the three in unison kind of have to be kind of worked on and developed, and kind of so if you beat yourself up over having a pizza, or if you kind of beat yourself up over not sticking to a restrictive diet, then that's obviously gonna kind of pull down one of the trifectas, and that's why so many people feel things like Weight Watchers and stuff. I think because a lot of those restrictive diets, it's so hard to forgive yourself.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely something when it comes to diets themselves. I think once you fall at a hurdle and you start beating yourself up about it, you're like, oh, well, stuff that, what's the point? Or you say, oh, well, sure, I'll just start again on Monday, and then you don't.
Yes,
so
you fall.
Like that is actually better because you can still eat the things that you enjoy, obviously in moderation, but be spending that other time working on your body then, because if your body has more time to actually process the fat that's already there, rather than restrict your eating. Because I think with any diet, it's hard to stick to long term, and if you aren't sticking to it forever, well then it's going to come to a time where if you're starting to eat proper food again, or eating normally, let's say, then you're going to put that weight on again. Whereas I think something like this here could be even better for you because it has more the mental and physical health aspects with it.
Before, whenever I followed a healthy diet plan, I followed a different diet plan. Essentially, I ate 8 times a day. I ate quite a lot, but I snacked throughout the day. And then what I did was I fasted 1 or 2 days a week in order to get rid of everything. And then I kind of, so you can try that, or you can try, even implementing it 1 day a week into your otherwise healthy diet plan. Is it gives the stomach just a chance to kind of get rid of everything. You know, and kind of it shocks the body or something. So 1 day a week, say on a Saturday when you're off work, you know, try your OMAD, which is something I used to do because essentially what I wanted to do was have a pizza, on my days off. So it meant that I could forgive myself for having a pizza, or I could forgive myself for going out and getting drunk and kind of still follow my diet plan. I could forgive myself for going out getting drunk, getting a burger, whatever. I would just not eat up until about 7 or 8 that night. Obviously eat before I went out drinking, and then obviously have myself a kebab or whatever when I was going home, and so I find that to be a good weight loss mechanism, assuming that your diet is okay throughout the rest of the week. Um, so
Yeah, cool. Have you blogged today?
not yet. I've been time stamping all day.
Yeah, I'm sure that took quite a long time, but yeah, it was a very worthy task to do.
It was.
Albeit very, very long and laborious, but it will be useful for anybody watching back that long video. And to be honest, it would mean we don't have to actually cut down those videos that we do into smaller chunks. We can just timestamp them so that people coming along can watch the bits that they're interested in if they're not interested in it all.
It was a worthwhile endeavour, if for no other reason than to kind of keep stock of kind of how we intend to improve moving forward in this, which is something that I wrote a blog on last night. I'm not sure, did you read that blog?
I haven't yet, I have to be honest, I haven't yet. I did have it on my list to do, but I didn't get around to it.
That's alright. Basically what I said was not to interrupt as much, which I think we've both commented on, to use more verbal or more visual cues. What else? To be more attentive to what is being said, which I think we've done better at tonight, a lot better actually, and a few other things. So I think that is a worthwhile endeavour for people to do. My blogs are obviously my self-improvement, but if I blog my self-improvement, it might inspire others to kind of write down their self-improvement every day, and that is the intention of my blogs. So that is the intention of my blogs, and if I want to improve in this skill, then I need to acknowledge my downfalls in this skill.
Yeah, I think, as I said to you earlier, this is something that's very new for me because I'm used to being the only one sitting in front of the camera and just being able to talk. So having an actual conversation like this, where it's different if you're just sitting in a room with somebody or just on a call to someone, it's different interrupting and stuff, but you do have to take a step back and remember, okay, well, we both have something to say here. And I actually think tonight has flowed much better with the way that we've done it. So if one person sort of guides the topics, and I think that's good. Let's ask Lynn, how do you think, as our regular viewer, how do you think tonight's video has come across compared to previous ones? Have you seen a difference, or did you even notice any difference? While we're waiting on her answering, I will say that we have done just over an hour. We've talked about the things that we wanted to talk about, and I think we've done really well, and I think this is a very good stopping point for us tonight, and we'll continue to talk about what we want to chat about for Sunday nights. So Lynn is saying she definitely sees the difference, and it is better. There you go. So we are learning, and it's only number 3, so I think we've done well. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy enough with tonight's show, as if we're a show, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Sunday night, and we'll delve into some of these things more. And definitely, we'll go through the other video where we talked about so many things in bit parts, and we'll start adding them into the list of topics so that we can delve into them a wee bit more. But yeah, so I think at 1 hour and 5 minutes, we could say goodnight.
Please. Thanks very much for watching.
I have hit stop streaming.
Okay.